Dear participants to the webinar on unlocking government procurement opportunities under the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. A very good afternoon from Singapore. My name is Justyna Lasik and I'm heading the Economic and Trade section of the EU delegation to Singapore. I would like to welcome you to the first of a series of seminars aimed at promoting the EU-Singapore FTA, which entered into force almost a year ago on 21st November 2019. Today's webinar will explore the opportunities created by government procurement provisions of the FTA. It will also provide insights into how EU and Singaporean businesses can enter the respective government procurement markets and successfully participate in public tenders on a non-discriminatory basis. Before we begin, I would like to make several housekeeping announcements. Please type your questions into the Zoom Q&A bar, which you can find in the lower part of the screen. We will have 2 Q&A sessions to address your queries following 2 sets of presentations by experts. This webinar is being recorded, except for the Q&A sessions. The recording, along with the slides, will be made available on the EU delegation website and our YouTube channel. Without further delay, let me now invite European Union Ambassador to Singapore, Her Excellency Barbara Plinkert, to give the welcome address. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justyna. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon from Singapore and a warm welcome to all of you joining us for today's webinar on unlocking government procurement opportunities under the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement from wherever you're joining, in Europe or in Singapore. The EU and Singapore are solid economic partners. Our combined annual bilateral trade in goods and services is valued at approximately 100 billion euro, the highest trade figure between the EU and a Southeast Asian country. Singapore is also the EU's top destination for foreign direct investment in the ASEAN region. At the end of 2018, EU FDI stocks held in Singapore reached 191 billion euro, the 9th largest in the world. In the reverse direction, Singapore FDI stocks in the EU totaled 110 billion euro, ranking Singapore as the 3rd largest Asian inward FDI partner after China and Japan. On top of these excellent figures, the comprehensive EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement entered into force on 21st November 2019, almost a year ago from now, the first of its kind with an ASEAN country. Especially in our troubled times of the COVID-19 pandemic, where trade is prone to disruptions all over the world, the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement presents a stable and predictable framework for our trade relations. This landmark agreement provides preferential market access conditions for trade in goods by eliminating tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and for trade in services. The agreement also includes far-reaching provisions on other trade-related topics, such as intellectual property rights, customs, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, sustainable development, and least but not least, government procurement, which is today's topic of discussion. The need of governments to purchase goods and services with public resources and for public purposes to fulfill their functions offers great opportunities for companies to respond to those needs. In the EU, the public purchase of goods and services is estimated to be worth around approximately 14% of GDP. Achieving value for money is primary aim of procurement regimes. The EU promotes open, transparent, and non-discriminatory procurement as the best way to achieve this goal, as it optimizes competition among suppliers. Also, the EU is emphasizing digital transformation and green solutions as key elements in procurement. Let me talk a little bit more about these crucial digital and green aspects in public procurement. As for digital solutions, the EU supports the process of rethinking public procurement processes with digital technologies in mind. This goes beyond simply moving to electronic tools. It also concerns various pre-award and post-award phases. The aim is to make them simpler for businesses to participate in and for the public sector to manage. It also allows for the integration of data-based approaches at various stages of the procurement process. In the area of green and sustainable solutions, Europe's public authorities, who are major consumers, clearly emphasize sustainability criteria in their procurement processes. by using their purchasing power to choose environmentally friendly goods, services, and works, they can make an important contribution to sustainable consumption and production, known as green public procurement or green purchasing. Although green public procurement is a voluntary instrument, it has a key role to play in the EU's efforts to become a more resource-efficient economy. It can help stimulate a critical mass of demand for more sustainable goods and services, which otherwise would be difficult to get onto the market. Green public procurement is therefore a strong stimulus for eco-innovation. As the speakers in today's event will explain in much greater detail, government procurement guarantees reciprocal access for EU and Singapore suppliers to each other's markets to provide goods and services to public entities on a non-discriminatory basis, which means there will be ample new opportunities on both sides. Today's webinar will focus on these opportunities provided in the government procurement of the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, allowing companies to better understand its contents and help them tap into the benefits of the agreement. In addition, the presentations on the EU's public procurement journal, Tenders Electronically, and Singapore's government electronic business portal will provide practical insights into how to participate in tenders in the EU and Singapore. I conclude here to leave the floor to experts from the European Commission and Singapore authorities, whom I really thank for being with us today. I'm sure this webinar will help companies to get better acquainted with how they can make use of the provisions of the FTA in relation to government procurement. So I hope this will help unlock opportunities for more cooperation between the EU and Singapore. So now I just wish you all a good and enriching webinar. Have a good day, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for the opening remarks. Let us now move to the first part of the webinar, which, as the Ambassador just mentioned, will focus on explaining the Government Procurement Chapter of the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. Our distinguished speakers who kindly agreed to join us today are Ms. Ilenia Ariano, Policy Officer in charge of international aspects of public procurement from Directorate General for Trade at the European Commission, and Ms. Anita Lai, Deputy Director in charge of Procurement Capability Development, Government Procurement Function Office at the Ministry of Finance of Singapore. Dear speakers, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Justina, and good afternoon to colleagues, ladies and gentlemen in Singapore, and good morning to colleagues that are joining from Brussels. I'm indeed Ilenia Ariano, and I work for DigiTrade for the unit which deals with negotiating and implementing free trade agreements in the area of government procurement. I'm very happy to be here today to provide you an overview of the FTA. So this is the content of my presentation. We will have government procurement. I will then discuss the chapter of the EU-Singapore FTA. I will go into details of the rules, the market access commitments, and then I will have a few words about what happens beyond legal commitments. What is government procurement? As these jokes mention, some people might think that this is government procurement, but no, we don't agree with that. What is government procurement is this, is how public authorities and agencies throughout the world can provide the best value for money to the public when they buy goods and products and services. For example, buying environmental buses is government procurement. Yes, thanks. Buying environmentally bus, for example, a commune buying environmentally bus, this is government procurement. Or a school that buys bio food for its canteen, this is government procurement. A public company providing electricity to the public and repairing its network, getting services for repairing the network, this is public procurement for us. Thanks. Why do we care about government procurement? government procurement, as it has been mentioned, is becoming it has a growing importance. It's a significant part of national economies. It is estimated from OECD that GP, government procurement, represents between 10 to 15% of GDP of modern economies. And why it is important? Because governments spend more and more and try to increase, to stimulate growth through public spending. But it's also important because it is crucial to fight against corruption, as having open, transparent public procurement procedure is something that helps creating a stable environment, business environment, and is able to attract investment from abroad. Some data here. In the EU, we have yearly 250,000 public authority that spend around 2 trillion for procurement, but this is just the largest, large expenditure. If we look at what is covered by the European directives on government procurement, then we have an above threshold value of around 500 billion euro. Above threshold means the procurement contracts that are above the thresholds of the directive and are interested by the directive. And the EU commits in GPA of this 500 billion, around 400 billion, looking at the GPA statistical data of 2016. Singapore also has an interesting procurement market, and again, according to the GPA statistics provided, it commits around 17 billion euro. So a bit of history of the EU-Singapore FTA, as it has been already mentioned before. The agreement was signed in October 2018. Then the EU and Singapore both started their procedure for ratification. We had the Parliament giving its content in February, the green light from Member States on the 8th of November. And as also Singapore completed its ratification procedure, the agreement has entered into force almost 1 year ago, on the 21st of November. It is an important agreement of the EU, as it is the third agreement with FTA with a partner which is already in GPA. So after CETA, so the agreement with Canada and Japan, we have an agreement with Singapore that brings our relationship to a closer level. Let's have a look more detail to the GP chapter. As we know, the GP chapter is composed, the government procurement chapter is composed of 2 elements, rules and market access. Why? Because parties agree that a set of rules that will apply to government procedure will be applying to the market access commitment, to the procurement covered by them in the agreement, which is explained in the market access commitments. And both EU and Singapore, they are already party to the GPA. This means that they have already modern procurement practices and systems, and they apply already high standard. But the EU and Singapore, with this agreement, have decided to go beyond the GPA. This means, on one hand, applying a set of requirements of procedures of rules that go beyond the GPA, and also to provide legal secured access to the firms of the other party for additional coverage. So basically what we see is that not only firms will have the right, will have secure legal access to additional entities, additional covered, but also that the value of the thresholds, the value thresholds of contracts which are subject to the rule has been lowered in some extents. What does this mean? This translates simply in additional opportunities out there for our companies, opportunities in terms of bidding. Let me provide a brief overview on the rules. The rules of the GP chapter focus around the 3 main principles: non-discrimination, transparency, and the need to ensure a fair, competitive, and innovative, sustainable procurement process. Let's go a bit in detail, thanks. The non-discrimination. As we know, this is an article which is mutuated from GPA and is reinforced in the EU-Singapore FTA. The principle is quite simple, that contracting authority shall accord to the goods and services of the other party a treatment which is no less favorable than the treatment that the party accords to its own goods, services and suppliers. And all this apply, of course, to covered procurement, to what the parties agree that will be covered by the FTA. Transparency is the second main cornerstone, main pillar of the rules of the FTA. And again, this is a concept mutuated from GPA, but we're going beyond that. So the FTA imposes minimum standards for the publication of public procurement notices, but also for the publication of information on the procurement legislation. This is quite important because the publication of procurement contracts allow basically that potential bidders are aware of the opportunities. But in the EU-Singapore FTA, we have gone beyond that. Let's move to the next slide. And we have been able to agree on some GPA plus elements. And with GPA plus, we mean, of course, elements that are able to build on GPA. The first important one is a single point of access. And this is strictly linked to electronic procurement, which has a crucial importance, as it has been mentioned by our ambassador. First of all, the parties, both EU and Singapore, have agreed that all the notices for the contracts that are relevant for this agreement will be published on one single website, one consolidated website at all levels of government. And this is a website that has to be free and available electronically. For the EU, we have the tender electronic system on which my colleague Isabel from DG GROW will provide an interesting presentation. And for Singapore, we have the Government Electronic Business Portal. The agreement also pushes and encourages and makes mandatory to the extent possible electronic procurement, and it has some facilitation. For example, a contracting authority that receive tenders by electronic means, they are able to reduce the time limit of the procedure, the time limit for the awards, but respecting 10 days, of always a minimum 10 days. The third and the last pillar around which we can build the rules is the need to have a fair, competitive and innovative process. This is also something mutuated from GPA, but where we have gone beyond GPA. What does it mean? In the GPA, as we know, we have already rules that are aimed at making sure that the procurement procedures are fair, that there is competition, and that is a sound process. And these rules apply horizontally throughout the process. For example, from the drafting of the technical specification of contract to the selection criteria, to the award, to the phase of the publication of the award notices. But in the EU Singapore FTA, in the chapter, we have gone beyond that. We have added some important provisions. For example, one of these, just to provide you some practical example, is the rule on the condition of participation. Basically, contracting authorities cannot require that a supplier has prior experience in the territory of that party. I've copied in my slide the rule that applies, and you will see in bold the GPA plus element, what it has been added to the GPA text. Next, please. And another very, very important GPA plus element concern high environmental standards. There is a trend in the EU, in Singapore, in modern economy, to make sure that contracting authorities are able to buy green and buy sustainable products as much as possible. So to make sure that contracting authority are able to ask for environmental products, the FTA basically allows contracting authority to refer to the technical characteristics of a label. In the EU, this is the EU Eco Label. In Singapore, it is the Green Label. Basically, contracting authority cannot request that a product bears the EU Eco Label, otherwise this would create a problem for suppliers from Singapore, for example, but can request that the requirements behind the label, that the technical description behind the labels are respected by the works, the goods and the services that have to be presented. There are some conditions that those eco labels, so technical specification of the eco labels and the green labels relate to what is bought, to what is being bought by the contracting authority, and that the labels respect certain requirements of being based on scientific evidence, and the process of their adoption must be open to everybody. The second aspect on which I would like to provide some insights is the market access commitment. As we know, parties agree that the rules will apply to covered procurement, will apply to procurement which is being specified in the market access commitment. And I've covered here the relevant annexes, those that are important where these commitments can be found. The EU and Singapore have managed to go beyond the GPA in 4 important areas. And I would like to briefly describe what are those areas, as it is important to understand the additional opportunities. We have central government coverage, central government coverage, utilities and other entities, public-private partnership, and the services. For example, at the level of central government, the EU has provided to Singapore access to a substantial number of central government authorities of EU member states. Those were not offered in GPA to Singapore, and now they've been offered to Singapore. It is more than 100 entities. On the other hand, Singapore has also extended this coverage to the EU, but by reducing the thresholds for the procurement of goods and services by its central government entities. So these thresholds have gone from 130,000 SDR, special drawing rights, to 50,000 SDR. The second area where there has been additional coverage is an important one, is the coverage by public companies and other entities operating in the utilities field. We're talking here about electricity, gas, transport, and so on and so forth, and other entities. Here we have Singapore that has increased the coverage to the EU compared to what was in GPA. There were 23 entities. Here Singapore has provided coverage to the EU of 57 entities. And I mentioned the Energy Market Authority, but there are also some important health authorities that are mentioned and are offered to the EU. On the other hand, the EU has offered to Singapore the procurement by those procuring entities that operate a network in the railway sector. So this was something that was not offered in GPA to Singapore, and now for the effect of the GP chapter has been offered to Singapore. The third element where parties have gone beyond the GPA coverage is public-private partnership and work concession. Public-private partnership are also called as PPPs. Those are various contractual arrangements. Sometimes they're quite complex to be defined and analyzed. But to mention the most famous one, we have the build, operate, transfer contracts, and many types of work concession fall within this concept of PPPs. with the agreement, Singapore and the EU took commitments on that. Singapore took commitments with regard to its public-private partnerships, and the EU has offered its work concession to Singapore. And though this has been, in this chapter of PPPs has been subject to the rules of the main procurement chapter. The fourth element where we have additional coverage that has been achieved in this GP chapter is represented by services. Singapore has expressly added to its GPA list services that are in the field of computer, telecommunication, just to mention some. The EU had also in GPA a list of services, but as there was a reciprocity, some sectors were not offered to Singapore yet. Now, by the fact that Singapore has offered additional services, the result is that there has been a reciprocal offering between EU and Singapore of a number of important additional services, which are mentioned here in the slides. And we have arrived to the last part of the presentation. As we have seen so far, the GP chapter is about providing secure legal access to the firms of the other party. But the reality is made of de facto awards, de facto opportunities. And we sincerely think that the GP chapter is likely to foster the opportunities for each other access, for each other companies, for the access to each other markets. And we are already experiencing some success stories. For example, looking at the experience in Singapore, we have seen that the Land Transport Authority of Singapore, which is an entity covered by the market access commitments by Singapore vis-à-vis the EU, has granted recently in 2019 a 70 million contract for the electrification of the mass rapid transit to a European company. And we have in front of us implementation of the FTA. Implementation is, as we know, as we have heard, we are in the first year. We are almost celebrating the birthday, and we have future work behind that is for us in the next years, and we have a special focus. We would like really to focus on the benefits that are coming, because we think that is very important to show what are the concrete, tangible benefits that this GP chapter is giving to our firms. And we hope that in the context of the implementation, we will be able to exchange information more and more on successful cases. So I would just like to thank you here and to provide you with some links that are from the EU that would be helpful. And the first one is a link just to the Digitrade website, where there are information about the EU-Singapore FTA and relevant documents, to the website of DG Grow, which is the DG which deals with the internal market, the rules, and provides information also on the data. And as a third element, to the Tender Electronic Daily website, where the public notices are published, and on this there will be further presentation by my colleagues. Thank you very much for your attention.
A very good afternoon from Singapore. My name is Anita Lai. I'm from the Ministry of Finance. Thank you, Elena, for giving us a very good and comprehensive coverage of the EUSFTA. For my presentation, I will be covering a little bit more on Singapore's procurement regime. So I think I'll jump straight into the introduction. Singapore is a city-state. We are actually a lot smaller as compared to the EU. I think Justina had, Elena had pointed out earlier that our government procurement volume, it's roughly about 17 billion euro. That's about 28 billion dollars in Singapore dollars. And all our procurements are actually carried out by just our two types of government agencies, namely the central government agencies like the Ministry of Finance, where I'm from, and also the a group of government agencies that we call statutory boards. The Land Transport Authority is actually one of them. So for the rest of my presentation, I'll be referring to these entities collectively as government agencies. In terms of the government procurement that is being carried out, it would be done by the agencies themselves, following a set of guidelines and rules that the Ministry of Finance basically puts in place. And of course, like in every government, there is the auditor that will check to ensure that there is compliance with all these rules and procedures. And we'll touch a little bit on what underpins our procurement regime. It's basically three basic principles. They are probably common across a lot of jurisdiction. Transparency, open and fair competition, I think has been elaborated quite a fair bit in the earlier presentation. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit more about value for money, which is one of the key principles for us. So in looking at value for money, we are focusing not just on the price alone, but on the optimal balance of price versus the quality that we get. And so because of this, it's not always that the lowest price tender would always be the winning bid. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. Yeah, our procurement regime is something which is fairly simple. We have a set of laws that covers our commitments to all the to the WTO, GP, as well as some of the FTAs that we have signed. There's also something called the instruction manual, which is a set of internal guidelines to help our agencies go about when they go about doing their procurement. And it's typical also for every agency to have what we call their own house rules. Now, these are those further guidance, those details that is required, like, for example, which approving authority that they would need to seek approvals from. And this is the 8 steps that we have structured our instruction manual. So basically, our guidance is following a 8-step process, which is a typical procurement process, all the way from establishing a need to sourcing and then to managing a contract. So I will now go on to focus a little bit more on some of the procedures that we have. As you can see on the slide, there are only, we have a very streamlined procedure. There are only 3 different types of procurement approaches that we use. Which one? It's all very much dependent on the estimated procurement value. So you see that there is small value purchases, quotations, and tenders. And as it was mentioned, we do our procurements via an electronic platform, which we call GeBIZ. I will be sharing a little bit more on GeBIZ in the second part of this webinar. Yes, so for small value purchase, since it is really small value, I think that I checked this morning based on exchange rate, this is probably about 3,700 euros. So these are meant for ad hoc buys. So there are minimal rules that will govern these procurement approach. Agencies are free to go ahead and buy directly from any supplier that is able to supply for their needs. They can even be purchasing it off online malls, which are pretty common these days. The next procedure is on quotations. Quotations is anything that is from Singapore 6,000 all the way up to 90,000. Well, in terms of approach, it is actually quite similar to tenders in the sense that there is an open invitation to quote, which is published openly in GeBIZ, and suppliers that are able or I mean, that are interested and able to supply are welcome to bid. And then we move on to the next, which is tenders. So tenders is, we implement the calling of open tenders for anything that is above 90,000. I think as with the EU, the three types of tenders that are used would be open, selective, and limited. So our default is actually open tenders. Yeah. So that's our default approach. It is actually open tenders, and notices are published in GeBIZ. And for us, the system is such that you are able to assess the tender opportunity, you are able to assess the tender documentation, as well as to submit a bid online. So that's all possible within one system. And something which I probably would want to mention, which is more unique to Singapore's context, is this thing that's called the tender price schedule. So this is something which is published after a tender is closed, but before an award is made. So the tender price schedule is basically displaying who are the tenderers that have submitted a bid, and what are some of the what we call the raw tender prices are. This practice of tender price schedule is something which Singapore had put in place way and long before we even joined the WTO. So it's essentially meant for transparency, so that bidders who have submitted their bids, at least they will know that the bids is being recorded, it has been received in that sense. Yes, and of course after that there will be tender awards. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. So of course the next tender approach that we have would be selective tenders. That is something which we will use only for more complex type of tenders, where there is, I think the EU colleagues would be very familiar with, where there would be a pre-qualification followed by a tender stage. The next tender approach that we have would be that on limited tenders. So for limited tenders, they are only used under specified circumstances. So more often than not, they are not the default position that we would use. I think this I would tie back to the earlier point which we made, which is one of the principles of government procurement for us will be value for money. And we believe also that open competition is the best way to be able to yield value for money. Yep. Last part, I think it's this thing on evaluation, approval, and contract management. As I mentioned right at the beginning of my presentation, all the government agencies carry out procurement on their own. So which means things like evaluation, seeking approval, and of course subsequently managing their contracts are all decentralized to the agencies to do. So one point in which we put in place this principle actually is that the party that does the evaluation, like the tender evaluation committee, is separate from the one that approves. So there is in there, therein there is a check and balance to ensure that the ones who you can't be evaluating and agreeing with yourself as to who to award to. So you would see this segregation of duties in quotations as well as in tenders. So maybe just to mention that for tender awards, we have a particular structure that helps to govern, although the approvals are being sought by agencies themselves from within their own agency, the composition of the tender award committees are quite, at least the chairperson is quite fixed. So across all agencies, you would see representation that is displayed on the slide here. And as you can see, the higher the value of the tender is, the more senior the chairperson is. And yep, and of course we provide here the links to the GeBIZ website, and also on the GeBIZ website you would also be able to find a guide for suppliers that will probably further flesh out what I have shared with the meeting today. So with that, I thank you.
Now we will have two presentations about the practical aspects of how to get public procurement contracts, which is basically very much linked to what we discussed just now. Our first speaker will be Ms. Isabel da Rosa, who is Digital Procurement Policy Officer at the Directorate General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs at the European Commission, and she will present the EU Tenders Electronic Daily tool, the so-called TED. Our second speaker will be again Ms. Anita Lai, who will explain the Singapore government one-stop procurement tool called GeBIZ. Let me remind you that about the Zoom question bar that you have. Feel free to ask questions. I think you already used this opportunity, but we would appreciate if you would type your questions in the Q&A bar tool. Dear speakers, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justina. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. It is my pleasure to be here with you to speak about the publication of public procurement notice in the EU. This presentation addresses two main topics, TED and e-forms. And no, TED is not related with the TED Talks. As Justina was saying, TED stands for Tenders Electronic Daily and is the online version of the supplement of the official journal dedicated to public procurement in the EU. We can say that TED has a long history. As you can see in the slide, TED website was created in 1998, and the first paper version of the official journal was launched in 1978. TED is indeed the central point of access to public procurement notices and provides free access to business opportunities in the European Economic Area and beyond. Numbers are quite impressive. TED published currently around 746,000 procurement notices a year, including 235,000 calls for tenders, which are worth around 545 billion euros. The numbers shown in the slide are slightly lower, and they correspond to the reference from 2018. Information about every procurement document is published in the 24 official language. In TED, you can find notice from the EU single market countries related to public works, supplies and services, utility contracts, concessions, and defense contracts. Notice from the institutions, agencies, and other bodies. And also noticed from projects financed by several European banks, such as the European Investment Bank, the European Central Bank, the European Investment Fund, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and also notice related with external aid and the European Development Fund. You can also find notice from candidate countries. Publication is mandatory for notice above the EU thresholds. However, procurement below thresholds is allowed and encouraged. Third countries can also publish only with prior permission, usually if there's a EU fund financing involved. Next slide, please. To send notice to TED, there are two main possibilities, either via e-notices, which is an online tool for preparing and publish procurement notices, or via e-senders, which is a machine-to-machine solution that sends notice in a standardized XML file. We have been promoting the increase of e-senders option since it represents a higher degree of automation, fosters data reuse, and the simplification of buyers' administrative tasks. The collect data is published in TED, which in turn provides information in open data format on the European Open Data Portal. This information is freely accessible by companies, and the open data sets are often used for many different purposes, like research in the field of public procurement or to produce statistical figures. Just for your reference, in terms of value of volume, you have some figures also from 2018. You can see that we have in the EU around 100 senders, and some countries they can have a single one that is a central point to send information to TED. Next slide, please. If we speak about open data, there are three main types of files. In the TED website, you can find data in HTML, PDF, and XML. There are monthly collections, starting from January 2011. Getting data through FTP format is also possible. There is information dating back from 1993. Finally, the Open Data Portal provides the CSV files dating back to 2006. Data can be freely reused by any kind of user, like academics, NGOs, governments, companies, and citizens. Some companies are building their services or analysis using TED data. This is a very relevant aspect because it offers real data about public spending with many business and governance use cases. This data is also the basis for several statistical reports produced by the Commission. And it's worth to mention that at the national level, many EU countries have developed their own IT solutions, and there is a trend to make them interoperable with TED. These interoperability mechanisms will avoid multiple entries and provides better data integration. Next slide, please. In order to facilitate the official publication of procurement data from EU, the European Commission has created standard forms according to the different EU legal bases for published public procurement. The standard forms are defined in the Implementing Regulation 1986 from November 2015. Currently, there are 27 different forms. However, with the rapid evolution of technology and the fact that the interoperability between IT systems is rapidly increasing, it was necessary to adapt the standard forms to the new challenge we have today. In particular, in the field of data quality, there are several problems that need to be overcome. For example, the lack of use of identifiers for buyers and suppliers that can lead to errors in the calculation of indicators of different nature, which in turn makes very difficult to measure performance. To design the new generation of standard forms that we call e-forms, an extensive stakeholder consultation took place during 3 years. The new implementing regulation was published in October 2019. As of November 2022, the new e-forms will be optional. From October 2023 onwards, it will be mandatory. Next slide, please. Contrary to the previous standard forms, e-forms are intended to be a large degree filled in automatic by e-procurement systems, not users, thus significantly reduce administrative burden. There are in the new e-form 6 types of forms that cover 40 types of notices. Many improvements and new features were introduced. There are better descriptions for all the fields. There are additional business rules. Lots will be much more flexible, the use of lots. There are more optional fields that allows for more flexibility and compliance with other systems. There are new fields that are targeting policy priorities like green, social, and innovative procurement. There are new volunteer notices, for example, for the contract completion notice, where you have the information about the total amount spent with that contract and when the contract really ended. We are currently promoting with all the member states for making their policy decisions before starting to implement the IT solutions. E-forms are not an off-the-shelf product. Before implementation, they need tailoring. It takes time to discuss and take decisions at the national level. In short, the data at European level has three major components, as you can see in the slide. The submission of the forms, now called e-forms, that contribute to the harmonization of the data collected. The portal where this data is published and where the search and notification features are, that we call the TAD portal. And then finally, the open data that allow free reuse of information for different purpose by any type of user. As a final note, it's relevant to say that following the implementation of the new e-forms, TED will be improved as well. The objective is to become more user-centric and user-friendly, and taking into the consideration the need of better search functions and enable more systems interconnections. My initial plan was to have a short demo of TAD, but considering the technical risks, we decided just to give you a little bit of TAD flavor in a slide mode. You can see in the slide the home page of TAD, and on the left corner you have the business opportunities that are organized by country, sector, place of performance, and by buyer. Last but not least, a new page was added recently to make it easier to find notice related with the medical equipment needs due to the COVID-19 crisis. If you choose the business opportunities, you will see the active business opportunities available by country or by type of procedure. On the other hand, if you select business opportunities by sector, you will see a screen where there are still the active business opportunities by country, but you can see also them grouped by business sectors. Just to give you one idea, by selecting the sector of technology and equipment, you can see the new screen with the list of the notice under this parameter. In this case, there are more than 44,000 notices, and you can refine your search by type of notice or country, or even by CPV, that means the Common Procurement Vocabulary Code. You have always the possibility to use the advanced search functionality to look for a specific business opportunity. In the screen, you can see a partial screen image from the advanced search. But the main point here is that you can combine around 25 filters to refine your search. Last but not least, there is a possibility to create a user profile, so you can save your favorite search or receive notifications by mail. For example, in the right side of the screen, you have the list of all the possibilities that you can use with your login. Thank you so much for your attention. I will be available for your questions.
Hi again, this is Anita. I will now attempt to give a brief introduction into the government procurement platform, which we call GeBIZ. Yep. So like we had chatted earlier, GeBIZ is really a one-stop portal where suppliers can look for opportunities as well as to submit their bids. So the current system that we are seeing right now is actually the second generation. We implemented GeBIZ way back in probably 1999 or around about there. And we're proud to say that this is a one of a kind because it is a system that is developed by a government agency in Singapore. So it's what we call as a bespoke. So this is our second generation, and we are hoping that the features that that GeBIZ has today are a lot more user-friendly. Okay. So as with all systems, you will require a user account before you can, how do I put it this way, before you can bid, right? Maybe just to clarify, GeBIZ is on an internet portal, which means that anybody is able to browse and is able to find tender opportunities. So top line information would be available. I apologize for that. The perils of working from home. There is a motorcycle that decides to rev its engine. I'm so sorry. Sorry for disruption. So, okay, coming back. So as with all systems, you will need a user account. So while you can browse and look at tender opportunities, you will need a user account before you can download tender documents and before you can submit a bid online. So to register as a GeBIZ trading partner is about signing up for a user account to, for simplicity. And the first account for every entity is actually free of charge. So there is no barrier whatsoever to signing up for an account. And it's open to both local as well as foreign suppliers. To date, we have, we have a total of about 95,000 at my last checking of GeBIZ trading partners, but of course not everybody is active. So in terms of the active trading partners, we have about 60,000, which is quite a sizable number for a market of our size. To register for a trading partner is fairly simple. It only requires 3 pieces of information. Provide some basic information about your company, and of course to nominate a human being, which we call it a representative, to transact on behalf of your company, and then to indicate your area of business. So I'd like to now just point out, because if you were to visit the GeBIZ website, you would find that apart from registering as a GeBIZ trading partner, there is something else that talks about registering as a government supplier. So in our own experience, sometimes suppliers get a bit confused as to what's the difference between the two. Registration as a government supplier is different from a GeBIZ trading partner registration. So if you think about the GeBIZ trading partner registration as a user account, then this one is about a quick, it's for efficiency. It's just for a quick evaluation of a supplier's financial standing. So typically in any tender, the buyer, the government agency, would like to know if the supplier is in reasonably good financial standing. So to ensure that the supplier is there to deliver the goods and services that is that he's being contracted to do. So because of that, often if every agency were to ask the same supplier for a set of his financial documentation, there would be a lot of inconvenience as well as inefficiencies. So registration as a government supplier tries to cut down on, to reduce this type of inefficiencies by asking the supplier for a set of financial statements, and then after that assigning what we call a financial grade of sorts, depending on the financial circumstances of that supplier. And with that status, the supplier is able to tender for jobs, and just to produce the government supplier assigned financial grade, and he need not then have to provide his financial statements repeatedly. Now, having said all these, you will realize that not all our tenders require such a government supplier status. If indeed it is required for that particular tender, it would be stated quite clearly upfront that the government agency is expecting that supplier to be able to provide. In today's context, we have agencies that will give suppliers a choice. You either have this supplier registration status, or if you don't, that's okay too, but you will then have to provide financial statements for the agency to assess. Okay, so I hope I'm being clear here. I also had prepared a video, but I think it was a high risk, as Isabel had said. So we tested it and thought that we would do away with the video. So I thought that I would spend the next 1 or 2 slides to talk a little bit about navigating the GeBIZ portal itself. If you forget everything that I'm going to say today, it's okay, no worries. The GeBIZ portal itself is self-contained to be able to guide users through in terms of usage. So when you land on the homepage of GeBIZ, it's a very simple page. I've done a small little cutout of what it looks like. You will see that there is an orange box which is circled on the slide here. Click on it and it will basically lead you step by step to how you can navigate through the various functions. Now, from a supplier's perspective, I hope it's not too small to be seen, but there are 3 black boxes there. These are actually 3 categories of functionalities that GeBIZ provides for suppliers. And in each of the categories, there will be more detailed steps, what I call topics that the supplier might be interested in. By expanding the topics, you will be able to see that there are things which are actually quite intuitive, maybe things like helping the supplier on how to search for tender opportunities on GeBIZ. And on each of the topic itself, there are video guides as well as a deck of slides to help bring a supplier through step by step. So if you go to the next slide, you would find that there are 2 icons that you will see on the website itself. One that shows, if you prefer not to have the visual experience, you can choose to look at a deck of slides. Or if you think that, I would rather look at a video or tune in, there is also a video clip that is available. Each clip is probably maybe about 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes at most. So it's basically to help users be able to seamlessly be able to use GeBIZ. And I would say that it is quite intuitive. We can go, yep. So in terms of searching for opportunities, I think it's quite similar to the TED system. For us, there is an advanced search feature, but if you are looking at just to do a simple search, for example, if you're in the electronics business, for example, and you would like to find if the government is buying anything close to electronics or something, you can just simply type that word into the search bar, and it would then be able to comb through and provide those tender opportunities, tenders and quotations actually, opportunities that could be relevant to what you're looking for. Okay. So this is just an example of what a tender would look like. I mentioned earlier that even if you were not a GeBIZ trading partner, you will still be able to find some top line information of tenders that are being put out. So by top line information, it's this is a screen grab of what it looks like. It will provide for you the tender title. It would show you which is the agency that is the buying agency. It would also show you like when the tender is going to close. Okay, now assuming you are not a GeBIZ trading partner, you chance upon this and you would then like to take part, then it's just simply going to the GeBIZ homepage and registering as a GeBIZ trading partner, after which when you secure and get your account, you would then be able to respond. There is a little button actually on this slide. It's in a blue box round about the right hand side. I'm not sure it's too small to be seen. There's this word called respond. So once you're a GeBIZ trading partner, you log in. When you look at this tender notice and you would like to respond, it's just simply by clicking the word the box respond, and then we go on to the next slide. You will be able to then submit a tender, so to speak. In submitting a tender, it's a fairly straightforward process as well. Enter the bid, which here would refer to the bid price. Upload your bid documents, because there would be your proposals, for example, or maybe if you're bidding for goods, you might want to attach the brochures and the specifications, etc. So all these things would constitute the bid documents. And then the last step would be, before you submit, is to verify. And after which, if you are happy with the content, you click the button submit, and then it's done. You have already submitted a tender. Okay, so after you have submitted the tender, then the next question will be, do I know if the tender has been awarded? So again, as indicated on the slide itself, you would be able to check the status of any tender, whether it has been awarded, or if it's not. In this particular instance, this example that I have extracted, the tender has been awarded, and so therefore the identity and all the basic information as to how much was the award value would all be provided for, and it's open access for anybody to take a look. Okay. Yeah. So last but not least, let me just share that there is something else besides. Because just now when we were talking about tender opportunities, it's real-time tenders that are being published on a daily basis. But there are also what we call the indicative government opportunities listing. So this one is it's basically a whole entire listing of tenders that would be called in the course of the year. So agencies, what they would do is, if they do their planning and they know that, oh, all right, for this financial year, I will be having to renew my contract, for example, for cleaning services. And what they will do is then because they are able to predict, or I would say plan ahead when they would roughly be requiring to recall that to so-called call a fresh tender for continuation of the services that they require. They would park all these under the government procurement opportunities listing. So this is also some place that suppliers might also want to go and browse, because then it kind of gives you an idea as to what is up and coming. So it also helps suppliers to plan ahead. There may be smaller suppliers who say, oh, it seems that the government procurement opportunity is too large for one small supplier to undertake. Well, if you know that that's up and coming, it's good that a small supplier could be part of a consortium, for example, or a joint venture with another supplier, and together they could then be able to bid for a project that is, in normal times, bigger than what they would be able to take on their own. Yeah. So the last slide here is just some things that we normally would advise suppliers to take note. Top on my list, and this one I hold quite dear to my heart, is for suppliers to please read the documentation properly, and if you require to seek any clarification, please do so, and do so before the tender closes. Because after the tender has closed, there isn't much that anybody can do. Okay, so I mean, we have come across cases where tenderers would come and ask for all sorts of clarifications, but the tender has already closed and you have already submitted your bid, and you had submitted it based on a certain set of assumptions which may not be correct. So that's really the top of why I mean, I listed this as the first bullet point. And second part is this thing about evaluation criteria. There are two types of evaluation criteria: the normal evaluation criteria and something which we call the critical evaluation criteria. So for critical, it basically means that these are essential, they must be met. Yep. And I think the rest I will leave to your reading. They are quite commonsensical, actually. So I think, yep, in the interest of time, maybe we should leave more time for Q&A.
Thank you very much. We are now nearing the end of today's webinar. And today's webinar confirmed that Singapore and the EU both have transparent and stable legal frameworks when it comes to government procurement, which from the outset makes it easier to navigate the opportunities. Thanks to the FTA, as it was explained today, more opportunities are being created that go beyond the existing commitments that both Singapore and the EU undertook in the context of the WTO Government Procurement Agreement. We hope that with this practical information that you received today, you will be able to access in an easier manner the public procurement markets of EU and Singapore. We also hope that soon we will be able to hear success stories linked to your participation in public procurement tenders in the EU and in Singapore. Let me use this opportunity to thank our speakers, Ms. Ariano, Ms. Lai, and Ms. Dalonza, as well as the moderator, Professor Gao, for accepting our invitation to join today's seminar. Let me also thank the audience for very active engagement and participation, which shows that there is definitely demand for webinars of this kind. As explained at the beginning of the webinar, all the materials used today, together with the recording of the presentations, will be made available online in case you want to consult them once more. We are looking forward to having you again during one of our future seminars focusing on other aspects of the EU-Singapore FTA. Detailed information on the upcoming events will follow on the EU delegation website. As you might know, this seminar was initially supposed to take place physically, but obviously due to the restrictions, we were not able to do that. At the same time, thanks to the virtual format, we were able to have participants from Europe and from Singapore without the need to travel. We hope you enjoyed this seminar, and thank you for participating, and have a great week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.